What if I told you that the bravest person at a family cookout was the one nobody bothered to ask about her day? That the woman everyone was laughing at had once saved 6 men's lives in the middle of a Pacific storm, so violent it bent rotor blades like tinfoil, and that she just sat there, quiet, eating potato salad, letting them laugh.
This is that story, and trust me, you're going to want to hear how it ends. The Reynolds family reunions had a way of making Cassie feel like a stranger at her own birthday party. Every summer, the whole crew descended on the old beach house near the Outer Banks. The cousins, the aunts, the neighbors who weren't really neighbors anymore but showed up anyway. And for about 6 hours, Cassie was reminded of exactly where she ranked in the family pecking order, which was somewhere between the quiet one and the one we're not sure what she actually does.
The backyard was in full swing by the time she arrived. Her dad, Roy, had the grill going, a cloud of sweet hickory smoke rising over the fence like a small weather event. Country music hummed from a Bluetooth speaker that nobody had asked for, but everybody tolerated. There was a cooler full of beer and a folding table collapsing slowly under the weight of too many potato dishes. Cassie grabbed a soda, found a spot at the picnic table, and told herself she could survive 4 hours of this. She'd survived worse.
She'd survived a lot worse. Her older sister Dana spotted her almost immediately. That was the thing about Dana. She had radar for an audience, and Cassie was always her favorite target. Dana cut across the yard in a sundress that probably cost more than Cassie's monthly groceries, her smile wide and glossy, a half-finished cocktail sweating in her hand. She had the kind of energy that filled every room she walked into, which was charming at parties, but exhausting at family functions.
"So what's the latest?" Dana called out, loud enough for the whole grill side of the yard to hear. "Still doing the simulator thing?" Cassie looked up from her plate, slow and steady. "No," she said. "I fly." Dana's eyebrows went up in theatrical surprise. "Oh, right. Where to? Between the coffee machine and the break room?" The laughter that rippled through the yard was fast and easy, the kind that rolls out without thinking. Even Roy chuckled from his lawn chair, that low, good-natured chuckle that always meant, "Don't take yourself so seriously, kid." Cassie didn't say another word. She just went back to her plate, pushing coleslaw around with a plastic fork. The silence bothered them more than any comeback ever could. She'd learned that lesson a long time ago. In certain rooms, the quietest person holds the most power. They just rarely get credit for it. Across the yard, Dana's husband Garrett was working the second grill, focused and methodical, the way he did everything. He was a Navy SEAL, 12 years in, and the kind of man who moved like he was always already 3 steps ahead of whatever was about to happen. He didn't join the laughter when Dana made her crack. He just glanced at Cassie briefly, the way you'd look at someone you hadn't quite figured out yet. Cassie raised her soda in his direction, half salute, half sarcasm. He gave a short nod back. No smile, no words, just a quiet acknowledgement. It was more than anyone else had offered her all evening.
Roy's voice boomed from his lawn chair. "Cassie, you ever gonna settle in and get yourself a real career? You've been chasing planes since college, for crying out loud." Cassie smiled, the practiced, patient kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Dad, I already have one." He waved his hand at the sky. "Something that keeps you closer to home. Something, I don't know, safer." That word landed differently than he meant it to. Safer, in Roy's language, meant something I can put into words at the dinner table, something I can brag about to the guys at the marina.
The conversation drifted back to Garrett and his recent training rotation down in Florida. Everyone wanted to hear about that, the real stuff, the operations, the drills. Nobody asked Cassie. Nobody ever did. Dana leaned across the picnic table, her voice dropping just low enough to sound like a confidence. "You know, I think you like the mystery of it. All those classified things you can't talk about, it makes it sound bigger than it is." Cassie looked at her sister the way she'd been trained to look at people who were trying to get inside her head. Polite,
steady, unreadable. You'd be surprised what fits under bigger than it is. Dana rolled her eyes. See, you always talk like that, half spy, half poet. Cassie smiled. Guess it runs in the family. One of us talks too much, the other too little. Dana's mouth opened, then closed. The tension hung in the warm afternoon air for just a second, long enough to be heard, but not long enough for anyone to do anything about it.
Mom, sweet, diplomatic, endlessly patient, jumped in from across the table. You girls are just different, that's all. Dana's the talker, Cassie's the doer. Roy nodded along. Yeah, if she's really flying those planes, she's doing plenty. Dana said, probably drones. More laughter.
Cassie finished her soda, dropped it in the recycle bin, and stood up. I'm going to get some air. Dana's smile was like a blade. You do that, Top Gun. The laughter that followed her across the yard was the kind you carry in your chest for a long time afterward, not because it hurts exactly, but because it echoes. Down at the water's edge, the air smelled like salt and charcoal, and the particular kind of freedom that only comes when you put 50 yards between yourself and everyone who's known you since childhood. The sun was doing that low, burning orange thing over the water, the kind of sunset that looks fake, like a screensaver. Cassie kicked off her sandals and let the waves run cold over her feet. She wasn't angry, not really. She'd done anger before, the hot, clenching kind that used to follow her home from gatherings like this, and she'd made her peace with the fact that it didn't help. When you've spent enough time in the Navy, you learn early that silence is armor. You pull it on, you buckle it down, and you move out. The problem with armor, though, is that it gets heavy, and when the same spot keeps getting hit over and over, even steel starts to thin. The breeze off the water shifted, and Cassie could hear the muffled sound of laughter from the yard behind her. She could picture Dana at the center of it all, holding court the way she always had, surrounded by people who were easy to entertain and easy to please. Dana had always been the one the room turned toward. Cassie had always been the one people forgot to introduce. And for most of her life, she'd convinced herself that was fine. Preferred, even. But standing there in the wet sand, watching the tide pull and release, something felt different. The laughter from the yard didn't sting. It just sounded small. You good out here? The voice came from behind her. She turned. Garrett had come down from the yard, still in his SEAL Team t-shirt, arms folded across his chest in a way that looked relaxed but wasn't quite. He walked a few steps closer, leaving footprints in the damp sand. I'm fine, she said. He looked out at the water. You don't say much. Only when it matters. He gave a small nod. Fair enough. They stood together in one of those silences that isn't uncomfortable because it isn't empty. It's full of things that neither person feels the need to say out loud. After a moment, Garrett spoke again. She doesn't mean half of what she says, Dana. Cassie looked at him. I know. She just doesn't know what she's saying. He almost smiled. You're a lot like some of the pilots I've worked with. The good ones. They never talk about what they've done. I'm in good company then. He nodded once. You should come back up. Burgers are getting cold. I'll be there. She watched him disappear back into the warm glow of the porch lights. The laughter followed him inside, ordinary and familiar, like a TV left on in the next room. She stayed a little longer. The water tugged at the sand beneath her feet, patient and relentless. She thought about what her flight instructor had told her once, back in training, when she was too young to really understand it, and too young to know she didn't. You can't stay grounded forever. Standing there under that fading orange sky, she started to believe it again. Somewhere in that house, her sister was still laughing, and for the first time in years, Cassie genuinely didn't care. She looked at the horizon and said, quietly, to no one in particular, "Next time, I won't stay quiet." The wind took the words and folded them into the sound of the waves. For now, it was just noise, but she could already feel the ground shifting under her feet, and the tide, slow, deliberate, unstoppable, kept rolling in.
The next morning hit like a reset button. Cassie's apartment in Virginia Beach was everything last night's backyard wasn't. Clean, cool, and mercifully free of relatives. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the low, familiar rumble of jets on approach to Naval Air Station Oceana. She pulled on her flight suit out of habit, even though she wasn't scheduled to fly. There's something about the weight of it, the patches, the fit, the faint ghost of jet fuel worked into the fabric, that feels more like a second skin than any civilian clothes ever had. She'd stopped trying to explain that to people. Her phone buzzed. Text from her flight lead, Lieutenant Valerie Ramos, who everyone called Val, and nobody ever called on time.
Morning, Reynolds. You seeing this weather? IFR check might be canceled.
Figures. I could use a quiet day.
Since when do you like quiet? Since family barbecues started counting as combat zones.
Val responded with a laughing emoji, and then a second text. You should tell them sometime, about 2020.
Cassie set the phone down on the counter and looked at it for a long moment. Tell them. Sure. Hey, Dad, remember when you said I needed a real job? Funny story. I already had one. I had it back in March of 2020, the night I helped keep a Navy SEAL team from going down in the Pacific. I'm sure that'll go over great between the brisket and the potato salad.
She poured a second cup of coffee and pulled open the desk drawer, the one she wasn't technically supposed to have certain things in. The folder was there, same as always. Yellowed at the edges now, label half faded, Operation Revenant. Half the lines were blacked out with heavy government marker, the way classified documents always looked, like someone took a permanent marker to a newspaper and called it bureaucracy. But her call sign was still visible. Night Warden, Aviation Liaison, Emergency Coordination. The date, March 18th, 2020, the night the storm hit off San Clemente Island. She hadn't been night warden for long back then. 3rd year in, still finding her footing, still believing her job was mostly about maintaining clear lanes and running comms checks. That night changed the definition of the job entirely. The memory didn't come back as a movie. It never did. It came in flashes, fragments of sound and motion, and the particular smell of ozone before lightning hits water. The radio squalling through sheets of static. Bird 2, down, repeat, Bird 2 is down. Another voice, strained to the limit. We've got 6 in the water, need coordinates. Night Warden, do you copy? And her own voice, somehow steady in the middle of it. Copy, hold vector 240, follow beacon on my mark.
2 hours. Every single one of them made it back alive.
No fanfare, no ceremony. She hadn't seen their faces, hadn't been in the debrief. Just a handshake from the CO the next morning, and 4 words. Good work, Keller. Cool head. A promotion came 6 months later. Quiet, routine-looking on paper. The mission stayed sealed. She'd spent the years since wondering if the men she'd pulled through the storm even knew who had been on the other end of that radio. That was the nature of the work. You saved a life, and then you handed it back to the world, nameless.
She looked at the folder one more time before closing the drawer. She'd been told more than once to get rid of it, but throwing it away felt like erasing something that actually mattered, so she kept it. The way you keep a photograph of something no one else remembers exactly right. That afternoon, she went to the hangar anyway. She told herself she just needed the air, the specific kind of air inside a working aircraft bay, heavy with fuel and hydraulic fluid, and the low institutional hum of machinery that never quite stopped. The T-45 trainer glistened under the overhead lights, red and white paint looking almost too clean, like something just arrived.
Didn't think you were flying today, Val said from behind her, appearing the way Val always appeared, out of nowhere, sunglasses hanging from her collar, coffee in hand. Just needed the view, Cassie said. Val stepped up beside her and studied her face for a second with the practiced eye of someone who'd been watching Cassie's tells for years. You look like someone who's been thinking too loud. Family weekend. Enough said. Val tilted her head. You ever feel like the job makes you invisible? Out there, I mean, in the real world? Cassie laughed, quiet and dry. The job is invisible. Nobody outside the wire gets it. You tell them you fly, they picture the movies. You tell them what you actually do, they stop listening. Yeah, Val said. That tracks.
There was a pause, then Val said it again. The men from that night remember, even if they don't know your name. Cassie wanted to believe her. She wasn't there yet.
Later, sitting alone in the locker room, she stared at the patch on her sleeve. Fleet Air Training Wing. It felt small against everything the job had actually asked of her. She thought about Garrett, the way he'd looked at her when Dana was making her jokes. He hadn't laughed. She'd noticed that at the time and filed it away. Military people picked up on things civilians didn't. They read posture, read timing, read the spaces between words. He'd been reading her, she realized, and whatever he'd found there had kept him quiet.
That thought followed her home through traffic, through a sunset that painted the shore drive gold, through a neighborhood full of tourists eating ice cream like nothing in the world was ever hard. She rolled the window down. The smell of salt water hit her, sharp and immediate, and for just a second, it smelled exactly like it had off San Clemente that night. She drove on.
Back home, keys on the counter, news on low in the background, storms, sports, the usual noise. She opened her laptop. Force of habit brought her to the Navy Joint Exercise portal. She wasn't looking for anything, and then she saw it.
Upcoming Joint Coordination Exercise, Virginia Beach. Instructor, Lieutenant Commander Garrett Renshaw. She sat back in her chair slowly, let out a long breath that turned, somewhere in the middle, into a very small smile. Small world didn't cover it. She'd known Garrett was a SEAL. She'd known he was an instructor. She hadn't made the connection until this second, hadn't put his name next to the course listing, hadn't thought to look. Now she had, and now she couldn't unknow it.
Part of her wanted to close the laptop and leave it alone. Another part, the part that used to fly straight into the teeth of Pacific storms at midnight, didn't.
She wasn't planning anything dramatic. No speeches, no grand gestures, just readiness. She poured the last of the coffee, stood at the window, and watched the last of the daylight go. The jet engines were there, as always, steady in the background. That sound had been the background of her whole adult life, like a heartbeat, like something that proved the world was still turning. Her phone buzzed. Briefing moved to next week? Free this weekend? Family's doing another cookout. You going?
She picked up the phone, typed slowly, set it down.
Yeah, maybe it's time I stopped staying quiet.
Outside, a jet came in low and hard, shaking the window in its frame for a single bone-deep second. Cassie didn't flinch. She was already somewhere else in her mind, somewhere between the woman at the picnic table and the one on the other end of that radio, figuring out which direction to fly. Her father's boat repair shop smelled like diesel and salt and decades of work that had never quite been finished. Keller and Sons Marine. The sign over the door hadn't been updated in 30 years, even after Roy had 2 daughters instead of a son. Cassie had always found that detail both funny and perfect. The world moves on. Signs don't. She was crouched over an outboard motor with a wrench when the tool slipped and clanged against the concrete floor. She stared at the grease smeared across her palm. Roy glanced up from the other side of the workbench. Careful, that's not a flight controller. You strip that bolt and we'll be here all day. Got it, she said. Her voice came out steady, but something behind her sternum tightened. He hadn't meant anything by it. She knew that. That was almost the problem. He never meant anything by it, and it landed the same way every time.
Roy Reynolds was a man built for visible work, calluses and early mornings and something to show at the end of the day. In his world, a job was something you could point to, a hull repaired, a motor running again, a check at the end of the week. The Navy was fine, in theory. It was the invisible parts that confused him. He leaned over the engine block, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Garrett's been offered an instructor slot down at Little Creek, training SEAL recruits. He shook his head with quiet admiration. That's the kind of job that builds a man's name. Cassie set down the wrench. Good for him, she said. Roy missed the edge in it entirely. You two should talk shop sometime. He knows discipline, you know structure. It'd be good for you. Good for you. That was his phrase for everything he couldn't quite understand about her choices. Dana's voice cut through the open bay door before Cassie could respond. Dad, Mom says sandwiches are ready. She was standing in the entrance in oversized sunglasses, phone in hand like a prop, looking effortlessly put together for a boat repair shop visit. She took one look at Cassie and raised an eyebrow. Didn't know Navy pilots got their hands dirty. Cassie didn't look up. Sometimes engines need tuning, same as people. Dana's expression flickered. Not quite hurt, not quite amused. Still hiding behind those mysterious metaphors. She clicked off across the concrete and disappeared back into the sunlight.
Roy watched her go, then turned to Cassie with the patient look of a man who'd been refereeing this match for 35 years. You don't have to bite back every time she opens her mouth. She's not 12 anymore, Dad. I know that, he said. I'm just saying, she's proud of you, in her own way. Cassie almost laughed. Sure, between the sarcasm and the Top Gun jokes. Roy didn't answer, just went back to his tools. The sound of metal on metal filled the air between them, precise and empty, like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one had the nerve to finish. Outside, the afternoon light bounced off a row of waiting fishing boats, their paint faded and salt-worn. Dana was leaning against her spotless SUV, scrolling her phone. She looked up when Cassie came out. You still mad? She asked, not looking up. I wasn't mad. Could have fooled me. Guess that's easier than really seeing me, Cassie said. Dana looked up then, actually looked. You always say stuff like that. Do you even hear yourself? Like everything's some kind of riddle. I hear myself just fine, Cassie said, every time someone laughs like I don't belong in the room. A pause, long enough to matter. Then Dana's mouth curved into something sharper than a smile. You know, if you wanted respect, maybe pick a career people actually understand. Cassie met her eyes. Steady. You want to be understood, Dana. I just want to do my job. Dana got in the car. The engine turned over. The exhaust left a faint trail of perfume and uncompleted thoughts. Mom called from the porch. You two fightin' again? Cassie walked up the steps. Define fighting. Mom sighed, the long, practiced exhale of someone who loved two very different daughters and had run out of new ways to manage them. She handed Cassie a plate. Turkey sandwich. Too much mayo. Same as always. Eat, it'll help. Food never fixed what words broke. Cassie took the sandwich anyway, because arguing with her mother was like arguing with a tide. You could rail against it all you wanted. It didn't care. It just kept coming. That evening, she parked near the beach outside her apartment complex and sat with the windows down, watching the last of the light die over the water. A couple of teenagers down the shoreline were setting off fireworks, too early, too close to the wind line. Most of them fizzled before they reached the surf. It reminded her, for no logical reason, of the way her family's conversations worked. Loud and brief, and mostly for show. Her phone rang. Val? She answered. You sound like someone hatching a plan, Val said. Just thinking. Dangerous. Cassie smiled despite herself. You ever tell them? Val asked. About San Clemente? No. You going to? Cassie looked at the dark water. No. Val was quiet for a moment. Then, you know what my grandmother used to say? Silence is the only way to win a fight you didn't start. Yeah, Cassie said. But sometimes it just means nobody knows you were even in it. They hung up. Cassie sat with that thought for a while. The particular loneliness of being invisible by choice was different from being forgotten. She knew that much. Being invisible by choice was something you controlled, but control had its own costs.
You paid them in moments exactly like this one. A truck pulled into the lot beside her, the engine cut. Garrett stepped out in civilian clothes in a grocery bag, moving the way he always moved, like he was aware of every inch of the space around him. He spotted her and changed course. "Didn't think I'd run into you out here," he said. "I live near here." He nodded, leaned on the railing beside her, eyes on the water. "You doing okay? Last night looked rough." "I'm fine." "Sure," he said, with the calm skepticism of a man who'd heard that answer from people who very much were not fine. He looked out at the ocean. "I've seen that look before, the one where someone's holding it together so hard they might snap at the seams. Occupational hazard," she said. He smiled a little. "Guess we both know that one."
They stood in quiet together for a minute. The good kind of quiet, the kind that means nothing needs explaining. Then he said, "Dana doesn't always engage her brain before her mouth. You've probably figured that out. Pretty much noticed that one in kindergarten." He laughed, low and genuine. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're the quiet one. I think you're just patient. That's one word for it." He looked at her, and there was something behind his eyes, something assessing, careful, the way he looked at things he hadn't quite categorized yet. "You ever serve near San Clemente Highland?" The question came out of nowhere, soft but deliberate.
Cassie's pulse ticked up exactly once. "Why?" she asked. "Did a training rotation off that coast," he said. "We had a night operation go bad, fast. Someone on comms kept us from losing the whole team. I've never forgotten that voice." She forced a steady smile. "Sounds like they did their job." "They did more than that," he said quietly. He didn't press further, just nodded once and picked up his grocery bag. "Good night, Reynolds." She watched his truck's headlights sweep across the lot and disappear into the dark. The ocean filled the silence back in behind him, patient as always. She stood there with her hands in her pockets. It wasn't the first time someone had almost recognized her. It was the first time she hadn't looked away. The call to Hangar 6 came on a Tuesday, middle of the week, between a maintenance briefing and a PowerPoint presentation so dull it had its own gravitational field. "Commander Cassie Reynolds, report for Joint Training Support." She walked in expecting the usual organized chaos that came whenever SEALs shared space with aviation personnel. The air smelled like competition and jet fuel, which was basically the same thing. Garrett was already there, clipboard in hand, running through a pre-briefing with a group of mixed personnel. Some pilots, some SEAL candidates, a few field coordinators. He had the floor in that way certain people do, not by taking up space, but by making everything else arrange itself around them. "This is about coordination," he was saying, his voice clipped and measured. "When things go sideways, and they will, you rely on comms, not heroics, not improvisation. You break formation, people go home in boxes." He said it simply, without drama, the way people say things they know to be absolutely true. His eyes swept the room and caught on Cassie's for just a second. A pause. The kind of pause soldiers get when instinct fires before the brain has the information to back it up. Then he moved on. After the briefing, he crossed to her. "Didn't expect to see you in the rotation." "Didn't expect to be here," she said. He tilted his head. "Flight coordination? Live ops experience?" She met his gaze. Nothing more. He steady-faced her a second. "You sound like someone who's kept her voice steady when things went sideways." "Maybe I just fake it better than most." He chuckled, tired and dry. "That's literally half the job." They spent the rest of the day running drills, simulated extractions, radio coordination under noise and pressure, mock rescues with communication failures built in. It was second nature for Cassie, muscle memory stitched in over years. But hearing Garrett issue commands triggered something deeper than professionalism. Every cadence, every phrase, every instinctive correction when a candidate broke protocol, it matched. Not just in style, in texture, and the quiet authority of a man who'd once trusted a voice on the other end of a radio with his own life. During a break, coffee in hand, Garrett said, "I always tell my people, in real chaos, there's one rule.
If whoever's on the comm sounds calm, you follow that voice. Rank is secondary, training is secondary. You follow the calm voice. Cassie nodded. Smart rule. Learned it the hard way, he said, looking out across the hangar floor. Back in 2020, storm off San Clemente. We lost visual, nearly lost half the team. Someone on comms pulled us back in. I never found out who. He said it carefully, the way people say things they've been carrying for a long time. Classified, apparently. Her hand tightened around her coffee cup. 1 degree, invisible to anyone not watching for it. Did you ever try to find out? She asked. Yeah, he said. I tried. He paused. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. Maybe, she said.
After the last exercise ended and the lights began shutting down in sections, Cassie sat alone in her car in the hangar parking lot for a long time. The windshield reflected a version of her that looked calm. Her mind was a different story. There's a particular loneliness that comes with being recognized only by a call sign. You build a name, and then one night, one impossible, necessary night, that name becomes the one thing you're not allowed to use in public. She reached into her glove compartment and pulled out the folder. Operation Revenant. She turned to the back page she'd memorized years ago. SEAL Team Bravo 6, Operation Recovery Point. The lead field operative listed under Commanding Officer Captain Marcus Webb was Lieutenant Commander Renshaw, G.
She exhaled slowly. She'd had a suspicion for weeks, from the coast, from the conversation by the water, from the way he described that night with the particular weight of someone who'd nearly died in it. Now she knew. He had lived because of her, and now he shared a house with the woman who laughed the loudest when Cassie was the punchline. The universe was many things. Subtle was not one of them. The next day, Garrett caught up with her before the morning run. You want to grab lunch? He said. Sure, she said, slightly surprised. They ended up at a diner near the base, the kind with sticky, laminated menus and coffee that had been sitting in the pot since 1994. No uniforms, just 2 people across a chipped tabletop. Your sister says you're the quiet type, he said, pouring sugar into his mug. She's not exactly a neutral source, Cassie said. He grinned. No, she's not. She also told me you're the smartest one in the family. Cassie snorted. And you believe everything Dana tells you? He shrugged. I believe what I see, and I can see you've earned your place. That's rarer than it sounds, in any career, any family. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The diner noise filled in around them, the clatter of plates, the hiss of the grill, a sports radio playing in the back. Comfortable, ordinary noise. Then he said, We're doing another family cookout next weekend. Tara, Dana, insist you come. Cassie looked at him. A flicker of something she couldn't quite name moved through his expression. Assessment. Anticipation. Wouldn't miss it, she said. He nodded. When he got up to pay, she looked at her reflection in the diner window. Under the surface, perfectly level, her pulse was doing the same thing it did in the cockpit, when everything mattered, when everything depended on staying composed.
She wasn't going to tell him. Not yet. Because if there was one thing a decade of military service had taught her, it was timing. You didn't transmit on the wrong frequency. You didn't break radio silence before the moment was right. And she could feel the moment building, the way air pressure builds before a storm, the way everything gets very still right before it decides what it wants to be.
Dana's backyard for the second cookout looked like a lifestyle magazine cover. String lights wrapped around everything, expensive outdoor furniture, matching drinkware, and enough coolers to hydrate a battalion. If the first Reynolds cookout had been a family barbecue, this was a production. Cassie stood at the edge of the yard for a moment before going in, scanning the crowd. Cousins, neighbors, a handful of Garrett's SEAL teammates in civilian clothes, tanned, broad, radiating the particular energy of men who'd spent too long being the most capable person in every room they'd walked into. Familiar territory. She'd spent her career in rooms like that. Dana spotted her and came over with open arms and a smile too wide to be unselfconscious. "Look who made it! I was starting to think we needed to file a missing persons report." She pulled Cassie into a hug that was more for the audience than for Cassie. "We were just talking about you," she said, nodding toward Garrett. He looked up from where he was managing the grill and said evenly, "Flight coordination. She manages airside logistics for joint operations." Dana laughed. Right. So basically traffic control for airplanes. That's kind of what it is, right?" A few people chuckled. Cassie smiled thinly. "Sure, let's go with that." Garrett glanced at her. Brief, measuring. He didn't laugh.
Roy had a beer in hand across the yard and raised it in Cassie's direction. "Good to have you back, kiddo. Both my girls doing great things. Dana running numbers, Garrett training the next wave of SEALs. Real family pride right here." "Happy to be here, Dad," she said. He nodded, already looking back toward the grill. It occurred to her, not for the first time, that pride and awareness were not the same thing.
Food came out, conversation scattered into its usual channels, real military stuff, which apparently meant anything involving men at close range. One of Garrett's teammates, a wide-framed man named Briggs, who'd probably never been intimidated by anything in his life, leaned back in his chair toward Cassie. "No offense," he said, with the preamble that always means offense incoming, "but flying's gotta be easier than ground combat, right? No mud, no hand-to-hand, none of that." Cassie set her fork down. "Define easier." He laughed, the big, uncomplicated laugh of a man who thought he already knew the answer. "I mean, no bullets, no blood. Just crosswinds," she said calmly. "Instrument failure at altitude, a dozen people depending on you not to make a wrong call in the dark over open water." The table went quiet. Dana moved fast to fill the silence, laughing it off. "She's kidding. Monica, Cassie, always sounds like she's auditioning for something." Garrett didn't look amused. His hand tightened around his glass. He said nothing, but the silence from that corner of the table carried its own weight.
Cassie stood up. "Need some air, excuse me." The porch was empty and blessedly quiet. The ocean was just audible beyond the dunes, steady and indifferent, the same as it always was. She leaned against the railing and breathed through the pressure building in her chest. She wasn't angry. She was tired. There was a difference, and it mattered.
The screen door creaked. Garrett stepped out. He handed her a bottle of water without being asked. "You okay?" "Fine." He looked at her. "You sure? Because you were about one more comment from flipping that table." "I've handled worse turbulence," she said. He smiled just slightly. "I know you have. That's kind of the thing." He leaned on the railing beside her, both of them looking out at the dark beyond the yard lights. Then, quiet, unhurried, he said, "You ever fly out of Point Mugu?" Something cold and clarifying moved through her. She took one breath before answering. "Once or twice." "Why?" His voice shifted lower. "That night, 2020, the storm off San Clemente. Our team almost didn't make it back." He paused. "I've been thinking about the voice on that radio ever since." She looked at him. "Did you ever find out who it was?" "No," he said. "Everything got sealed. CO told us to let it go." "Did you?" He looked straight at her. "No, never did. That voice kept us alive. You don't forget something like that."
From inside, Dana's voice cut through the screen door. "Garrett, we're doing pictures out front." He straightened up, glanced back at Cassie. "Coming back in?" "In a minute." He turned to go, then said it softly, almost to himself. "You remind me of that voice, that's all I'm saying." When he went inside, Cassie turned back to the ocean, let the breath out that she'd been holding for the last 3 minutes. The tide was coming in. She could hear it even over the party noise.
She stood there until the night got quiet enough to think in. Then Dana's youngest, Cooper, 6 years old and already twice as intuitive as the adults, came wandering out with a paper airplane clutched in both hands. "Aunt Cassie," he said, solemn and proud, "I made this one fly all the way to the fence." She crouched down to his level. "That's good distance. What's your secret?" He grinned. "Throw it hard and don't blink." "Good rule," she said. "Can I try?" He handed it over. She adjusted the nose fold and the wing angle by feel, tiny instinctive corrections, and launched it. It cut through the warm summer air clean and level and landed well past the fence line. Cooper's eyes went wide. "How'd you do that?" "Wind," she said, "and patience."
From behind her, Dana's voice cut in. "Cassie, you're going to give him ideas." Cooper frowned. "She didn't scare me." Cassie smiled at him. "It's okay, buddy. Your mom's just jealous of the aerodynamics." That pulled a laugh from Garrett's teammates, the real kind, unguarded. Dana crossed her arms. "Real mature." "Runs in the family," Cassie said, easy and light. Dana's mouth opened. Then Garrett's voice came from the grill. "Food's getting cold." And the tension broke, just like that, the way it always did when someone said the right thing at the right pitch.
Later, after the plates were cleared and the stories started, the war stories, the ones that grew in the telling, each one slightly bigger than the last, one of Garrett's teammates turned to Cassie with the particular look of a man who'd decided to test something. "So, Reynolds, you ever think about joining the actual military?" She looked at him across the table, steady, patient. "Remind me, what's the fake one called?" That one shut him up properly. But Dana, as always, couldn't leave well enough alone. "Relax, she's joking. She's not exactly the combat type." Garrett's voice came out low and even, like a blade drawn without drama. "That's enough, Dana." She blinked. "What? I was kidding." "I know," he said. "Think before you kid next time." The weight behind it moved through the table like a current. Conversations died. Chairs shifted. Even the background music seemed to recalibrate. Nobody spoke. And then, in the silence, looking straight at Cassie across the table, Garrett said it. Quiet, certain, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting years to open. Revenant One. A beer can slipped from someone's hand and rolled across the deck. Nobody moved. Cassie didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. She held his eyes, and for the first time since she'd known him, Garrett Renshaw looked, for just a fraction of a second, genuinely shaken. "You were there," he said, almost under his breath. "I was everywhere that night," she said. Dana looked between them, adrift. What's going on? Blake? Garrett? What does that mean?" He turned to her, slowly. "That's the pilot who saved my team's lives." Dana's face drained. The fire pit crackled. Somewhere past the dunes, a wave broke. "Her?" she whispered. "Her." The silence that followed was not heavy. It was clean. It was the specific kind of quiet that arrives after something important has finally been said. The long-held breath let go, the weight distributed back where it belonged. Cassie stood, smoothed the front of her jacket. "Dinner was great, Dana, really." Then she turned and walked toward the porch, the sound of the ocean rising to meet her. Behind her, the yard stayed quiet for a long time. She didn't look back. The porch was dark, except for the light spilling through the screen door, and the yard behind Dana's house had gone to a murmur, the electric, self-conscious kind that happens when a room full of people suddenly realizes they've been reading a situation completely wrong for years. Cassie stood at the railing with her back to it. The ocean was out there somewhere, beyond the dunes, invisible but present, the way it always was. She could hear it. She let herself breathe. The screen door opened behind her. Dana came out alone, without her phone for once, which meant something. She stopped a few feet away and stood there, arms folded across her chest. Not defensively, but the way people hold themselves when they don't know what to do with their hands. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice was smaller than Cassie had heard it in a long time. Not weak, just stripped of performance. Cassie kept her eyes on the dark. "I know you didn't." A pause. The waves filled it in. "That's not an excuse," Dana said. "No." Dana exhaled. "I'm sorry, Cassie. I mean it. I am genuinely sorry." Cassie turned and looked at her. Not with warmth,
not yet, but with honesty. "I know," she said. "I believe you." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, the full, clean kind that comes with time and repetition and the slow work of actually changing. But it was an opening, and an opening was enough for now. Garrett came out a few minutes later, quiet as always. He handed Cassie a bottle of water, and the three of them stood on the porch for a moment in a silence that nobody tried to fill. After Dana went back inside, Garrett reached into his front pocket and pulled out something small, a brass coin, edge-worn from years of handling. He held it out. Cassie looked at it. "What's this?" "My team put it together after that night," he said. "We made a decision. If we ever found out who Night Warden was, we'd give it to them." She turned it over in her palm. The words etched into the metal caught a sliver of porch light. "Honor through silence." "Fitting," she said softly. He looked at her. "You don't get to stay invisible anymore, Reynolds." The way he said her name, not her call sign, not a title, just her name, clear and direct, hit somewhere deeper than she expected. She closed her fingers around the coin. "Guess the secret's finally out." "Some secrets," he said, glancing back toward the house. "Deserve to be."
Back inside, the backyard had rearranged itself the way spaces do after something significant happens. The noise was quieter, the kind of quiet that's actually full of things people are processing. Roy was sitting by the fire pit, beer resting on his knee, working through something behind his eyes. He looked up when Cassie came around the corner of the house. "That true?" he said. His voice was rough, rougher than usual, the way voices get when they're doing something unfamiliar. "All of it." He looked at his hands, calloused, scarred, good, honest working man's hands. "You never said." His tone wasn't accusatory. It was something else, something she recognized after a moment as shame. "You never asked, Dad." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "Guess I should have," he said, and left it there.
Mom appeared at her shoulder almost immediately. Her hand went to her mouth and her eyes were wet but proud. That specific combination that only mothers manage, the one that's equal parts hurt and awe. "All this time," she said. "All this time and you kept it to yourself." Cassie shook her head gently. "It wasn't mine to tell. It belonged to the people who made it home." Mom didn't say anything more. She just reached out and squeezed Cassie's forearm once, firmly, the way she had when Cassie was small and had done something hard. It was more than enough. Cooper, Dana's youngest, who had been hovering at the edge of the adult conversation with the radar unique to children, tugged on his mom's sleeve. "Mom." Dana looked down. "Aunt Cassie's a hero." Dana's mouth opened and then closed again without a sound. Garrett crouched down to Cooper's level. "Yeah, buddy. She's the reason your grandfather still has fishing buddies to argue with." Cooper's eyes went wide and solemn. He turned to Cassie with the focused gravity of a 6-year-old who has just been given crucial information. "That's the most cool thing I ever heard." Cassie crouched down to meet him. "Heroes are just people who do their job when it counts. That's all." He considered this for a long second, the way small children consider things that actually matter to them. Then he nodded once with total conviction. Perhaps he was the only one in the yard who understood it completely, cleanly, without any of the complicated feelings the adults had to work through first. Kids have that gift. They cut straight to the thing.
Later, when the gathering had wound down to the comfortable drag of empty cups and folded napkins, and people sitting in chairs because they'd stopped being willing to stand, Cassie walked down toward the beach. The sand was cool, and the tide was coming in, moonlight laying silver trails across the moving water. Garrett caught up to her halfway down the path. He walked beside her to the surf without asking permission or making excuses. That was the thing about him. He never announced himself. He was just suddenly there, the same way the right radio frequency is suddenly there when you've been searching through static.
"You know," he said, looking out at the horizon, "Roland, my old CO, he talks about that mission every time we get together. Every single time. Says it was the closest he ever came to losing everything he had." He paused.
He used to say there was someone on the other end of that radio who sounded like they were born steady, like calm was their natural state. Cassie looked at the water. I wasn't. I was terrified. He glanced at her, something shifting behind his eyes. Yeah, he said. The ones who say they're not are the ones I don't trust. She smiled. He reached into his jacket pocket and drew out a second coin, older than the first, edges smooth from years of hands. He turned it in his fingers before holding it out. This one's from Roland. He's been carrying it since 2020. Said to give it to Revenant One if we ever found her. She took it. The metal was warm from his pocket. She looked at the face of it. Hold the sky. Tell him she still remembers the frequency, she said. He smiled. Not the brief, controlled version, but a real one. I'll tell him. The tide crept closer, foam running over their boots. The sound of it was the same as it had always been, indifferent and absolute, older than any of their decisions. When Cassie finally turned back toward the lights of the house, what she felt was not triumph. It was something quieter, more durable. Balance, maybe. Not fairness. She'd given up expecting life to be fair years ago. But balance. The feeling that the weight was finally distributed evenly after years of leaning. Thank you, she said quietly. Not for the coin, for recognizing her, for saying the name out loud at that table when it would have been easy not to. He heard what she meant. Thank you, he said back, for all of us. They walked up the beach together. The charcoal smell from the grill had mellowed into something sweeter in the night air. Behind the porch lights, the family moved in the warm, slow way of people who have eaten enough and said enough, and are ready to let the night settle things the rest of the way. For once, nobody tried to fill the quiet with noise. The world, for a little while, felt balanced, and for Cassie Reynolds, that was enough to breathe easily for the first time in years. The morning of the ceremony was clear and hard blue, the kind of sky that looks painted. Cassie had seen hundreds of mornings like it from a cockpit, the world from above, flat and bright and indifferent to whatever was happening down at human level. Down here, though, on the tarmac at Naval Air Station Pensacola, it felt different. It felt like the sky was paying attention. Rows of folding chairs faced the open hangar bay, a brass ensemble tuned in the corner, their sound tentative and formal. The smell of jet fuel drifted through the open doors, and the polished floor reflected the overhead lights in long, trembling streaks. Cassie stood in her dress uniform and ran her thumb down the crease on her sleeve, the same motion, the same habit she'd had since the academy. Habit was what you reached for when nerves threatened to show their hand. The announcer's voice came through the PA, professional and clear. Commander Cassie Reynolds, Naval Flight Operations, Joint Rescue Coordination. Her name, not Night Warden, not Revenant One, not the Quiet Sister, or the Mysterious One, or the one Dana makes jokes about. Her name, full and real over the loudspeaker, in front of a hangar full of uniforms who understood what it meant. Applause moved through the space in a wave. She stepped forward, heels striking the polished floor in rhythm, and stopped in front of the Admiral. He shook her hand firmly, the kind of handshake that comes with decades of institution behind it. Commander Reynolds, your actions during multiple joint operations represent extraordinary leadership and precision under pressure. The Navy is proud to recognize your service. She nodded. Thank you, sir. He leaned in slightly. Your father's here, he said, quiet enough for just the two of them. He looks like a man who's been doing some thinking. She turned her head just enough to find him in the audience. Roy Reynolds in a sport coat that was slightly too formal and slightly too old for the occasion, hair combed the way he must have combed it for school pictures in 1978. Mom beside him, beaming. And behind them, in full dress uniform bright with ribbons, Captain Marcus Webb, Roland, standing straight and still. He hadn't told her he was coming. She hadn't asked. Some things you don't arrange. They just show up. When the Admiral pinned the medal to her chest, the band found its footing again, and the sound of it rose up into the high vault of the hangar and lingered there. Cassie stood with her hands at her sides and let it happen. She'd earned this a long time ago. It had just taken the world a while to catch up to the paperwork. After the ceremony, the crowd thinned into the kind of slow drift that follows formal events. Handshakes, photographs, the careful navigation of conversations that are half official and half human. Cassie handled every exchange with the competence she'd brought to everything else. Then Marcus Webb appeared at the edge of her peripheral vision, moving through the dispersing crowd with the deliberate, unhurried economy of a man who decided exactly what he needed to say and was not in a hurry to say it wrong.
"You look like you've been wearing that uniform your whole life," he said, coming to a stop beside her. 22 years will do that, sir." He shook his head with a faint, tired smile. "You can drop the sir. I've been retired long enough to miss it just the right amount." He reached into the inside pocket of his dress coat and produced a small envelope, cream white and worn at the edges. Inside was a photograph, black and white, slightly grainy, a younger Marcus Webb standing beside a helicopter on a rain-soaked tarmac, his arm around a pilot whose face was washed out by the overexposure of a flash gun or a passing flare. "I kept this for years," he said. "Didn't know who to give it to until last week." Cassie looked at it for a long moment. "We were all just doing our jobs," she said. He shook his head again, more firmly. "No. What you did that night was not covered by just doing your job. What you did was keep 8 families whole. I know, because I'm one of them." He held her gaze. "I owe you truth, Reynolds, plain and simple. You deserved recognition years ago. The decision to seal that mission was mine, and it protected my reputation more than it protected yours. I've been carrying that for a long time." Cassie held his gaze. She didn't say it was all right, because it hadn't entirely been. She didn't say it didn't matter, because it had. She just said, "I appreciate you saying it, sir. Marcus." She nodded once. "Marcus."
He reached into his pocket one more time and added another coin to her hand, the oldest one yet, heavier, its edges softened by years of being turned over and over by a man who couldn't let it go. "One more thing," he said. "Not for me, from Zach Holler. He was the one you talked down off the deck that night, the one who was closest to going in the water. He's a civilian contractor now, 3 kids. He asked me to give you this and tell you," he paused, "tell you that his oldest daughter just turned 17 and she wants to be a naval aviator." Cassie looked down at the coin, felt for the first time all day the edge of something it would have been professionally inadvisable to display in a hangar full of brass. She breathed through it. "Tell him," she said, "that she should do it." When the last of the official guests had cleared, Garrett found her near the hangar doors, sitting on a bench by herself, with the 3 coins laid out in her palm like a kind of map. He sat beside her without preamble, still in his uniform, jacket unbuttoned at the collar in the way that meant he was done performing for the day. "Roland meant every word," he said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "So what now?" She looked at the coins. I stopped the kending the quiet is the same thing as being okay with being invisible." He nodded. "Past time." She smiled. "Probably." He reached into his jacket one more time and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Roland had this pulled through proper channels. "Mission log from Operation Revenant. It's got your call sign visible." She unfolded it carefully. At the bottom, below the official signatures, in Marcus Webb's handwriting, in ink on a government document, which was either bravery or retirement speaking, were 3 lines. "For Commander Reynolds, Revenant 1, you held the sky so we could live beneath it." She read it twice, said nothing. Outside, the wind had picked up over the bay, bending the flags along the flight line into long, bright diagonals. Garrett looked out at the water. "You know what I tell my recruits about courage?" She waited. "I tell them it's not the absence of fear. That's a myth. The real thing is doing the job when you'd rather not be there at all. When it's dark and cold, and there's no guarantee any of it is going to work." He paused. "I never told them where I learned that. I know now." She folded the paper back carefully and tucked it with the coins.
Don't make it into a lesson, she said. It'll lose something. He smiled. Fair enough. They drove back along the coast road with the windows down, not talking much. The kind of ride where the silence is comfortable because everything that needed to be said has been said, and what's left between people is just the solid fact of understanding each other. When he pulled up outside Cassie's apartment complex, she gathered her things and started to get out, then stopped. Garrett? He looked over. Thank you for saying it at that table. He shook his head slightly. That was overdue. Still, she meant it. He knew she did. She pushed the door closed behind her, walked up the steps, and didn't look back. Some exits you make clean.
By the time summer rolled around again, the Reynolds family barbecue looked like a different event entirely. Same backyard, same grill, same ocean in the background, but the air had changed. It was level. It smelled like charcoal and cut grass, and the particular ease of people who have been through something and come out on the other side of it with a better understanding of who they're dealing with.
Roy was flipping burgers in a spot near the left side of the grill, humming along to a country song in a way that suggested he was actually enjoying himself. He'd started wearing a small navy pin on his collar 2 months ago, Cassie's squadron number, which he'd had to ask her twice to repeat because he'd written it down wrong the first time. He never mentioned it. He just wore it. That was Roy's language. Visible things. She understood it better now. Mom had the lemonade arranged in that way she had, like she was preparing for a state dinner, but her face was relaxed in a way it hadn't been at this gathering in years.
Dana was across the yard with Cooper, helping him line up chairs, barefoot in the grass. She looked up when Cassie came through the gate, and the smile she offered was small and genuine, which from Dana was worth more than anyone else's standing ovation. "Hey, Commander," she said. "Hey yourself," Cassie said, setting down the bag she'd brought. Dana's mouth curved. "You're never going to retire that nickname, are you?" "Not unless you earn one of your own," Cassie said, and Dana laughed. Not the performance laugh, the real one, the one that crinkled the corners of her eyes and had no audience in mind.
Garrett was at the grill, ball cap backward, already in charge of the situation. He caught Cassie's eye and gave her a nod that said everything that didn't need saying out loud. Cooper appeared from behind a lawn chair at full speed and nearly crashed into her legs. He was holding something in his palm. "Look!" She bent down. It was Roland's old seal coin. Garrett must have given it to him. It lay in the boy's small hand, smooth and gold in the afternoon light. "Grandpa said I could keep it," he announced. "Do you know what it means?" Cassie asked. He nodded, completely serious. "It's for people who don't quit when things get hard." "Good answer," she said. He looked at her with the focused curiosity that was his most distinctive trait. "Dad says you flew through storms to save people." "I didn't leave them behind," she said simply. He thought about that. "Dad says that's being brave." She shook her head. "Dad's being generous. That's just called making a choice."
Roy's voice came from the grill. "Food's on!" And the whole afternoon shifted into that easy, generous rhythm that belongs to summer evenings when nobody needs anything from anyone anymore. The old picnic table had been replaced while Cassie wasn't looking, something wider and sturdier, oak, already settling into the yard like it had always been there. Everyone gathered around it without being asked, which was itself a small miracle. Plates got passed, cold drinks appeared. The conversation drifted, light as clouds, from Cooper's robotics club to Roy's ongoing dispute with a marina supplier to whether the bass were running early or late this year.
Halfway through dinner, Dana leaned toward Cassie and dropped her voice to something private, not stage whispered for the table. "I never properly thanked you," she said, "for not writing me off." Cassie looked at her. "You didn't give me a reason to." "I gave you about 100 reasons to," Dana said. Something in her voice broke slightly and then held. I didn't understand what you were carrying. I didn't think to ask." "Neither did most people," Cassie said. Dana shook her head. "That's not an excuse." "I know," Cassie said. "I'm not offering you one. I'm just saying, you're not alone in it.
People see what's loud. The quiet stuff takes longer. Dana looked at her for a long moment. Really looked. The way she probably should have been looking for years. Then she said, I think you're the strongest person I know, Cassie. I think I've always known that. I just couldn't figure out how to say it without making it sound like I was losing something. Cassie set down her fork. You weren't, she said. You never were. Dana nodded, once, eyes bright, and then she reached for her lemonade glass and said nothing more. And somehow that said everything.
Garrett, across the table, had caught the exchange in the careful peripheral way he caught most things. He met Cassie's eyes briefly, just a glance, warm and knowing, and then went back to his food. After dinner, the yard spread out into the loose, comfortable chaos of a gathering winding down well. Roy fell asleep in his favorite lawn chair with the contented look of a man who had finally made peace with something. Mom moved between conversations, refilling glasses, touching shoulders, the quiet center of everything. Garrett's teammates from the earlier barbecue were there again, but this time quieter, with a different kind of attention in their faces when they looked at Cassie. Briggs, who'd made the crack about flying being easier, caught her eye across the yard and gave a brief, steady nod. She returned it. Clean. Closed. Done. Cooper found Cassie on the porch as the sun started going low and orange over the tree line. He sat beside her on the step without asking, coin still in his hand, turning it over the way he'd probably been doing all day. You think I'll ever fly? He asked. I think you'll do exactly what you want to do if you're willing to work for it. He looked at the coin. Dad says bravery runs in the family. She looked at him sidelong. No, she said. Bravery is a choice. You choose it every time things are hard. It's got nothing to do with your last name. He was quiet, processing this with that uncommon seriousness of his. Then, so it's like flying. Just like flying, she said. The sky doesn't hold you up. You hold it. He sat with that for a moment. Then Garrett stepped out onto the porch and looked down at them both. You two solving the universe? Getting close, Cooper said. Garrett smiled and handed Cassie something small, a polished silver pin, aviation wings. Pick this up for you, he said. Your collection needed one more. She held it. You didn't have to. I know, he said. That's why I did. Dana appeared in the doorway. His collection of making people speechless never gets old, she said. Cassie looked at her. Dana looked back. Something passed between them, the quiet acknowledgement of two people who had figured out, late but not too late, that they were actually on the same side. You want some more lemonade? Dana asked. Yeah, Cassie said. I really do. The sun finished its descent behind the trees, and the string lights came on in the gathering dusk, and the yard turned warm and small and exactly the right size. The sound of laughter, real laughter, the kind that doesn't have an agenda, drifted across the grass. Roy had woken up from his nap and was telling a story to two of Garrett's teammates about a tarpon he'd fought for an hour in the Gulf of Mexico, and they were listening in the genuine way that men who respect work listen to other men's work. Mom was laughing at something Dana said. Cooper was back in the yard chasing fireflies with the coin still safe in his shirt pocket.
Cassie sat on the porch step and let all of it wash over her. The voices, the light, the smell of charcoal and salt, and let herself just be present in it without calculating the distance to the nearest exit or armoring up against the next thing. The coins were in her pocket, 3 of them, warm from her skin, heavier than metal alone could account for. She touched them once with her fingertips and then left them alone. She knew what they were. She didn't need to keep checking. Garrett came back and sat beside her on the step. They watched the yard together for a while without speaking. Then he said, You know what Roland told me years ago, right after you pulled us in from that water? She waited. He said, The people you never hear about are the ones keeping the whole thing from falling apart. She smiled at the yard. He's not wrong. No, Garrett said. He's usually not. After a moment, she said, I used to think staying quiet was the same as being safe. Not the same thing. No. She looked at the silver pin in her hand. Turns out the only thing staying quiet kept me safe from was actually being known. He turned to look at her. And now? She looked up at the first stars coming out over the coast, past the tree line, past the dunes, past everything that had been in her way for years. Now, she said, I know what I know, and I'm done being the only one who does. 12 years later, the road back to the Outer Banks felt both familiar and changed, the way places always do when you've been elsewhere long enough to come back as a slightly different version of yourself. The pines still leaned toward the coast, the air still parried salt and the threat of afternoon storms. The old Reynolds house sat where it always had, weathered by decades of coastal weather and family weather in equal measure, but freshly painted on the porch rails and lined with framed photographs. Cassie killed the engine and sat for a moment in the quiet of her car, looking at the house. Through the front window, she could see the mantel, and on the mantel, behind glass, the 3 coins. Not in her pocket anymore. They'd been there for years, where people could see them, alongside Roland's old seal cap and a folded flag, and, new since last summer, a framed silhouette photograph of a jet in the full extension of a climbing turn against a sunset sky. Beneath it, in Dana's handwriting on a card she'd made herself, for the pilot who flew before we knew to look up. The front door opened before Cassie reached the steps. Cooper was taller than her now, which still surprised her every time, and he had his mother's eyes and something of Garrett's stillness, a combination that turned out to be genuinely useful. He grinned when he saw her. "You're late." "I'm consistent," she said. He held the door open. "Grandpa's already on the porch, says he's been waiting since lunch." Grandpa says that to everyone. True. Inside smelled like cedar and good coffee and whatever Roy had been building in the garage workshop he'd set up in retirement. The framed newspaper clipping was still on the wall, the one from Pensacola, the ceremony morning, her name under the headline in 2 inches of serif type. Roy had made Dana frame it, hung it himself, and then pretended it had always been there. He was in the rocking chair on the back porch, cane against the rail, navy cap on still. She came out and sat in the chair beside him, the one with the old burn mark from a wine spill decades ago, still there, which felt right somehow. He didn't open his eyes. "Still wearing that hat," she said. "Only one that fits the stories," he said. They sat in the kind of quiet that takes years to earn. After a while, he said, "Your mother wants me to tell you the potato salad's ready. Tell her I'm coming." "In a minute," he agreed. Another quiet. Then, "I was a fool," he said. She looked at him. "Dad?" "No, listen." He opened his eyes, and they were the same clear gray they'd always been. Just older now, with more behind them. "I spent 20 years wondering why you were the way you were. Quiet, gone, hard to reach. Turns out you were carrying something the whole time that I never thought to ask about." His jaw was tight, but his voice was level. "That's on me." She didn't argue. She also didn't comfort him out of it, because he didn't need comfort. He needed to say it. "I know it is," she said simply. He nodded. "Then, I'm proud of you. I've been proud a long time. I just said it sideways, mostly, through other things." "The pin on your collar," she said. He looked down at it. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's the one." She put her hand over his on the arm of the chair for a moment, and he turned his palm up so she could. They stayed like that while the afternoon moved around them. The sound of family noise coming through the screen door. Warm and real. Above the tree line, 3 T-45 trainers cut across the sky in tight formation. Students from the base, running patterns, white contrails smicing the blue into clean parallel lines. Cooper came bursting through the screen door at the sound of them, shading his eyes, watching them go with an expression Cassie recognized from years ago on her own face. "That's what it looks like," she said quietly. He turned to her. "Yeah. You want it?" He looked back at the sky. The jets were banking now, turning east over the coast, and the sound of them rolled over the yard in a long, chest-deep wave. "Yeah," he said, more certain this time. "I really do." "Then do it for the right reasons," she said. "Not for the look of it, not to prove anything to anybody. Do it because you love what it asks of you." He looked at her sideways. "What does it ask?"
She thought about that for a moment, about the night off San Clemente, about static and storm and 6 lives on the line, about the choice she'd made in a fraction of a second with no guarantee it would work, and how she'd still make it again tomorrow without hesitation. "Everything you have," she said, "in exchange for something you can't get anywhere else." He nodded the way he always nodded when things mattered to him, slow and definite, like he was filing it. Then he sat on the step beside her, and they watched the contrails soften and blur and spread into the blue until they were indistinguishable from cloud. Inside, someone turned up the music. Dana's voice carried through the screen door, laughing at something Roy said. The smell of the grill drifted over the fence. Garrett appeared in the yard below the porch, beer in hand, looking up at the fading contrails. He glanced at Cassie, at Cooper, back at the sky. "Not bad," he said. "Was better when there were 4 of them," Cassie said. He grinned. "Always wanted more?" She leaned back in her chair, looking up at the last bright thread of white against the blue. The light was perfect, that late afternoon gold that turns everything it touches into a version of itself worth remembering. She thought of Roland's words on the paper that night after the ceremony. She thought of Zach Haller's daughter who wanted to fly, and of Cooper on the step beside her, and of the 3 coins behind glass on the mantel, and of the long road between the woman who had sat alone at a picnic table pushing coleslaw around a plate, and the one sitting here now, on a porch that felt like home, wearing the full, quiet weight of being finally, completely known. Honor doesn't always arrive in a ceremony. Sometimes it takes years to make the crossing, traveling across sealed files and classified missions and family barbecues, where someone laughs at the wrong thing and the right person doesn't say a word. It moves slowly, in the dark, the way tides move, but it always gets there. It always finds shore. She touched the place where the coins usually rested in her pocket, found only the softness of fabric, remembered they were inside now, behind glass, visible, and let her hand rest open against her knee instead. Some things you don't hold to remember where you've been. You hold them until you're ready to put them somewhere the light can reach them. And then you let go, and you look up, and you see what the sky has been holding for you all along.